Nice to be with all of you. As Dan said, I'm Josh Poduska. I'm the Chief Data Scientist with Domino Data Lab. I've been with Domino about a year and a half now. I love Dan's intro. 4 years is forever at Domino, forever in a tech startup. A year and a half feels like a long time too. I've learned a lot over these past few months. And one thing that I love about Domino is the space that it's in, right? It's that data science platform space. And one thing that especially attracted me to that was because I had some experience with running things like a center of excellence. In my past, about 4 years ago, I ran an analytics center of excellence. It was one of the most rewarding and adventurous times in my career, but doing that showed me that the potential that a center of excellence can have on an organization to establish best practices, to establish a way of doing things that is really going to make an impact on the bottom line of an organization. And what I saw at Domino with being able to facilitate that and help companies accelerate that type of knowledge sharing and that type of system building really attracted me to it. So I'm very excited about the content we have today, especially with our friends from Slalom that are here to dive deep into it. So what are we going to get into? We're going to start off with a few introductions real quick, then we'll talk about what is a center of excellence. There can be different definitions, and depending on the size of your teams and the needs of your teams, it's going to perhaps look a little bit different for everybody. We'll talk about some trends that we're seeing in the industry around centers of excellence. We'll get into the meat of it, which is more around developing a COE. What does that look like? What is the operating model for a center of excellence? How do we define our ROI that we're generating? We'll get into defining capabilities. This is going to be a little bit interactive, so we'll have a breakout session, a little bit of a workshop type feel to it near the end with some case studies. All right, so who are we? I already introduced myself. This is James. He's a solution principal with Slalom. And this is Tony, the other Tony at the end. Tony Bradyhoft, who is a consultant with Slalom. And the middle Tony wasn't able to make it today. All right, you heard about Domino at the beginning from Dan. Let me pass over to James, and he can tell us a little bit about Slalom.
Hey, so thank you very much, by the way, for showing up, and thank you, Domino, for having us. This is a really fun event. So this slide right here, what I really want to say is that we've been partnering with Domino for a while. We've been working with them across several markets. We work with them across the ocean as well. And what I've done here is just put our mission statements side by side. This is what drives us, this is what gets us out of bed every day. And when we started a partnership, every time we work together, our cultures are well aligned. So a little bit about Slalom. We tend to work only in local markets. Our customers are local. We have long-term relationships with everyone we do. We are a modern consulting firm. We deal with strategy like a lot of larger, more traditional firms. We also dive deep into technology, subject matter expertise, and business transformation, which is really important right now, as the dinosaur slide points out. One of the funny things about working with Domino at an event like this is that we have to be very careful not to repeat the same slides, because quite a lot of what you just heard about Domino, the perspective, the point of view, we share quite a lot of that. And so, this is one way to think about it right here. These are our core values, sort of side by side. And this is a fun exercise with the partners that we love to work with, to map these one-to-one, that we tend to approach work the same way, we tend to approach our goals the same way, and define success in a lot of the same ways. So Slalom, like I said, we tend to work on a local market. We tend to not travel. We're focused across many different technology industries, life sciences, modern technology, financial services, across the board. Tony and I both sit in data and analytics, so our job spans from building models, writing code, pulling in data, building data pipelines, all the way to building up a center of excellence, helping organizations redesign how they work together and redesign those relationships. One more tiny bit of commercial here. So we have more than 7,000 people now across the US, as well as Canada and the UK. We have clients all across this city especially, but in every tech hub in America, we have a strong presence. Every phone that's in this room and every app on that phone, we probably have a good relationship with them as well. We are, like I said, we have an office everywhere there's a technology presence. Everywhere that you know of an industry that is centered in some city, we're probably there, and we're probably helping those businesses transform what they do on a day-to-day basis. And more right now, analytics are a huge piece of this. So as as you heard a minute ago, expertise is a really big thing. Data science is different because it's a little harder to train someone to be a data scientist right away. This is not a 6-month onboarding process. And this is what stands out in this industry that is different from what we've seen in the past and what we've done in the past. And so a lot of what we do is walk into an organization, we understand their needs, we try to redesign how they work together, we train up their people. Sometimes we build out entire processes. The way I tend to think about this is some people don't like consultants necessarily to own some of the data science if it's the core technology of the company. If it's their IP that they really want to keep in-house, and I agree with that. I think it's a good principle to keep that to themselves. We can support everything around that, and very often some of the work that we do with some of the forward-leading data science, AI, and machine learning companies is to help them with everything else that's distracting them from the core machine learning technology that they're developing, right? So every machine learning company has people analytics problems. We do quite a lot of that. Every machine learning company has problems with their supply chain and understanding how to build their infrastructure to support the models that they're building and deploying in real time. So this is sort of a description of some of the work that we do at Slalom, but I wanted to just introduce a little bit. So we're going to be around networking as well. Tony and James up here, and we've got Eric in the back of the room. Sophia might have just stepped out for just a second. Let me know you've got my contact information on the table, and we're going to lock the doors when we get to the network or to the workshopping piece, because talking to each other is what none of us really like to do on a day-to-day basis, but it's one of the most important pieces of I think what we're doing in this hour and what we do for a living. All right.
Thanks, James. So I've got a couple slides here to kick it off. These are things that at Domino we like to think about. Even though we're a data science platform software company, we still like to think about the bottom line of what data science is doing for our customers. And because our software enables processes, we think a lot about people. And that really, when you get down to it, what is a center of excellence? It's made up of people. And that's your most valuable analytical asset at your organization. And as James mentioned, there is a ramp up problem inside of data science. Data science platforms can help reduce that, but it's not going to solve it completely. There's also a churn problem among data scientists at companies. You lose them quickly. So we think that focusing on people is something that should be top of mind of all organizations, and especially we wanted to mention that at the beginning as we talk about centers of excellence. Here's a framework that we like to share at Domino for thinking about people assets. So how do you attract the right people? How do you assess them during that hiring process? How do you train them, keep their skills up? How do you retain them over time? How do you improve that churn of your data scientists and data science team members? And then finally, which gets into a little bit more of what we're going to talk about in a Center of Excellence talk, is how do you organize your data science teams? This is just a teaser slide. We'll get into this more in depth, but there are different methods and strategies for organizing your data science teams and for organizing a Center of Excellence. One trend that I have seen, and this is, I guess, maybe getting a little bit ahead of the game, but we'll dive into it here in a second. But one trend I've seen is I think we've overcompensated a little bit to decentralization. This is across many industries. I've seen this at several different large corporations. So especially the larger you get, the more this trend is prevalent. Everyone knows that having one data science shop in a business of multiple business units is not going to work very well, because you're not in the trenches, you're not seeing exactly how data science is applied and implemented, you're disconnected from your end customers. But that overcompensation to being completely decentralized has happened for a lot of industries. So as we get into what a center of excellence is, you might start to think, have we overcompensated? And is it time to pull back in at least a little bit and establish best practices, establish a center of excellence? I'll end with one quote from one of our customers that I found very fascinating and I think is true. They said that 10 years ago, data was their competitive advantage. This is a life sciences company. Then they said, okay, 10 years ago it was data. 5 years ago it was models. They built better models than their competition. They said today it's their process. It's their data science flywheel. It's the process of getting models into production, of monitoring them, keeping them fresh. That process that at the ground foundational level has to do with people is what gives them their competitive advantage today. So let's dive into this, and I'll pass it back over to Tony and James here to dive in a little bit deeper.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Oh, thank you. So moving on to a COE, data science COE, there are some unique aspects specifically related to data science. As Josh was mentioning, a data science COE should focus a little bit more heavily on retaining, acquiring talent, given it's so difficult to train data scientists. Also, as opposed to maybe a BI or ERP center of excellence, focused a little bit more on shared data assets and supporting things like experimentation. But what is a data science center of excellence? So these are some of the kind of core pieces of what a data science center of excellence will attempt to do. You're trying to centralize around this competency, around this capability. And so that means some form of, some sort of separate structure outside of your typical reporting structure. So you're centralizing around your best practices, your data infrastructure, your data assets, tool evaluation, managing licenses as it relates to different tools and different data storage tools. Also, just generally trying to set up things like data governance and things that are a little bit more cross-functional. So as you approach setting up a COE, one of the things that you'll want to do is define an operating model. And so this, as data scientists, this is something that is not necessarily, it's a little bit foreign to us. But the way that we like to do this at Slalom is we like to use something called the STAR model. So this should look familiar if anyone has worked on designing an organization or setting up an operating model for how a COE would potentially work, or even an organizational function would potentially work. It was originally created by a guy named Jay Galbraith. I hope I said that correctly. It's a very, very famous org design consultant and academic. And there are many different flavors of this STAR model. This is a Slalom specific one. Basically, the big change that was made here is we added customer kind of in the middle, so customer centric. And for a data science COE, depending on how it's set up, that can be either external customers or even your internal customers if you're serving business functions directly. But walking around the STAR, so you've got capabilities. These are things like explicitly calling out data engineering, data science, data collection, data storage, data governance. All of those are separate capabilities. And we've got an exercise later where we'll kind of ask you at each of your tables to define what are some potential capabilities that will be part of your data science COE. Does it need to just be a data science COE, or do you want to group together some additional analytics functions in there as well? People and structure. So here's where we get into the talent acquisition or retention stuff that was mentioned. Additionally, this also includes things like training and development. Structure isn't necessarily just who reports to who, but also roles and responsibilities. Technology and data, that's pretty straightforward, but are you going to have entirely shared data assets? Are you going to have shared data assets and different systems between your different functions? So defining what that looks like for your COE. Governance and process, that's also pretty straightforward. Metrics and rewards, so what is a good model? What's good impact? How can we tell our data science COE is being impactful? And how can we reward successful implementation of data science models? And how do we successfully reward our people for contributing to the business using data science? Moving on from the STAR model, so one of the parts of the STAR was structure. And so these are some potential options for designing your structure for a COE, a data science COE. So as Josh was highlighting a little bit earlier, you've got your kind of roughly your two more typical options, which is your central centralized option and your decentralized option. So centralized would mean you have a specific analytics function that manages kind of end-to-end creation of insights and creation of data science models and pushing them to production and pushing those results out to your functional teams and functional stakeholders. This is a great way to lose entire connection with the business and to not have adequate functional representation in your creation of your data science models. It's also a great way to have a pretty extensive backlog of projects for you to work on. If every individual function is coming to your data science COE to address whether they be small or big business problems, you eventually end up with a pretty large backlog that those functions tend to get frustrated at having to wait to have their problems addressed and attempt to do it somehow on their own or go to external consultants to do these things. The decentralizing option, so this is basically pushing all of your analytics functions or your data science functions out to the individual business units or functional units. So this is great in terms of you're getting more effective data science. It's more connected to the business, and it's more impactful individually for these different units. And so each analytics function and data science function will set their own strategy. The issue here is between and across the different functions, you tend to get varied levels of competency. You tend to get 20 systems all using the same data, but manipulating them in different ways. So actually, across the organization, you don't have a lot of consistency. The hybrid option in the model is what we've tend to see work pretty well in amongst our clients. So this can be some form of a steering committee or a COE where you've got embedded resources actually in the functions, but those resources are also responsible for reporting to some sort of centralized COE or reporting steering committee. And we'll go through, I think we've got an exercise on the table for designing what this could potentially look like for your organizations. Another way to think about your centralized COE is just the level of involvement that they would actually have with your functional units. So going from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, you go from entirely decentralized to something that's fully centralized. So on the left-hand side, you have a small team that's essentially just coordinating data science or analytics activities amongst different functional units that are still very much decentralized. So there it's helpful for just initially sharing best practices, coordinating investments in different tools, managing licenses, that sort of stuff. The advisory is a little bit different, where the actual centralized group acts as a bit of a consultancy, and they actually engage with the functional units on specific problems, advise them on how to design and address the solution and then implement the solution. And this is great for setting a more consistent strategy and having more consistent impact across the functional units. Adaptive support is where you're extending that model a little bit and having your centralized resources play a bigger role in actually implementing the model and designing the actual solution. And then centralized delivery is basically throwing a problem over the wall into your data science COE, and you kind of engage with the functional units on that specific problem, and then deliver your machine learning solution. And you've got a centralized team that's doing that. An example COE structure. So this is an example of one of our clients, a hybrid structure. So you can see you've got an analytics COE that is sitting outside of both IT and the functional teams. And you've got the functional teams where you actually have resources embedded that are performing the analytics, data science, developing those models. They're embedded within the teams, but they're communicating with the COE through communities of practice. Also, they're responsible directly to the COE in addition to their functional responsibilities. So you can see within the COE, you've got roles that are a little bit more specifically focused on cross-functional initiatives. So you've got data governance lead, you have a change management lead, training and communications lead, all of those folks they're concerned with initiatives that are cross-functional, as opposed to functional impact of data science models. And awesome. I think we're on to the breakout.
All right, so we do have an exercise, and I'm going to do a quick time check. You have multiple sheets of paper on your table. The one we're going to start with is the one you just saw with 3 organizational models. So I'm going to give you a warning. In about 7 minutes, you're going to have to talk to someone that you didn't show up with. So let's get the introvert anxiety out of the way right now. What I want you to start with these 3 organizational examples, this might look something like what you have in mind. It might look something like the COE you already have. It might look nothing like what you do, and you really want to start from page 1 and understand how to even get started. If we do our jobs right today, you have at least a first page in this book of how to operate, right? So what I want you to do is, first of all, take about 5 minutes, go through these questions, really think deep about your organization, where you want to be, what are the limitations, what are holding you back. Spill all this out on the sheet. I want you to take this with you. This is sort of a tool that you can go home with as an actionable outcome, combined with the backside, where you can actually start to have this conversation and try to make meaningful change in your organization. The second step is going to be the STAR model on the back. So we like to start with this when you're thinking about what do you need to think about in sort of the universe of possibilities. This is a place for you to put down what you're good at, what you're bad at, what capabilities do you have, what do you want to have. And so there's some capabilities up here. Obviously, all of us are going to start out with machine learning and deep learning and things like that as our capabilities. Start there, that's great. But think a little more broadly about what your organization actually needs to support how those models work in production, how you can communicate with your business stakeholders, and how these things move more fluidly in your company. And I want to point out 2 very important pieces of the STAR model. Number 1, we can't even begin to have this conversation without a guiding star, without a North Star. So that vision box at the top, if you struggle to put that down on paper, when you go back to your company, that's where you need to start, right? We need a vision that we all align on, that we all communicate, and that drives everything else that happens here. And if you'll notice, the circle that sort of underlies the star here, culture. That hits on every single aspect of how your organization works. I didn't put a leading statement or a description on culture. We all know what we're good at and what we're bad at. We all go home with a little bit of pain or with a little bit of happiness surrounding our culture. And so I've left that open for you to sort of reflect on what needs to change, what do you love and you want to enrich in your organization. Those 2 especially I want to focus on. And then let's hit all 5 sides of this star. So I'm going to set a timer for about 5 minutes, introspective. You can put your headphones on if you want to. And then we're going to come together, and what I'm going to ask you to do is find someone you didn't show up with. Find someone who's not from your company. You're going to spill a little bit of IP, and that's okay. You're going to spill a little bit of your closet. But let's actually share some of these ideas, coach each other through asking questions about, what are we good at, what are we bad at, where do we need to grow, and what capabilities, what aspects of an organizational model do we need to put in place or to really plan around before we start this process. All right, 5-6 minutes. Okay, at the risk of cutting off really good conversations, and I can hear some of them, and I love that this is happening, what we're going to do is we're going to shake it up and we're going to do it again. But first, I'd love to hear from, say, 3 people. Volunteer, stand up, share something that you're coming away with that you didn't know before. Share something about an organization that you've just learned about or about your own that you might be able to take away.
I work for a marketing agency, and about 3 years ago, we initiated a COE, and we basically started in the most extreme decentralized, Wild West, all of our offices doing their other thing, went heavy centralized, and have now just naturally and organically find ourselves motivated by the circumstances and challenges we found, drifting into the hybrid direction and trying to basically move in that way. Essentially, we built the central, and now we're trying to strategically seed all of our other little offices with spies from the COE, basically, to kind of create that hybrid connectivity and those connections. So that's kind of been our experience, and yeah. So.
Great. No, I don't mean to cut you off. I was actually wondering, so you're saying that that's now disseminating to the organization.
Slowly.
How did you source the COE in the beginning? Where did people come from?
We tapped, I think, resources. We had folks that were sitting in these offices and kind of frustrated and not necessarily having that organization. So we probably built half the team internally just by marshaling people that were there. And then we went out on a little bit of a hiring spree. We had 6 people and now we have 12 or 15. We're a very small shop. But yeah, some of it was within the organization. Some of it was going outside.
Great. And that actually reflects something that, so Tony and I are working on a similar project right now, very similar to what we're hearing. And I think this is an important point when thinking about talent in a COE. It's really tempting to pull the smartest people out of all the other organizations and centralize them. And boy, does that create a brain drain. It creates a real mess. And now you create a huge dependency on your COE, and suddenly they have a backlog, and it's really difficult to serve the rest of the organization that you've now pulled that talent from. It's one of the challenges that we've seen in the past. And so, one way to solve that is to really think early about trying to hire into that some of the skills that you're missing in your organization, or potentially rotating through.
And you do need to be careful because the folks who aren't in the COE may think that the COE is getting special treatment or otherwise advantaged, and there could be some cultural friction there as well. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Then that's a very familiar theme. And the COE does get special treatment, right? That's kind of what's nice, that they are excellent. That's where the name comes from. What I want you to do, take what you've just learned. Hopefully you can put some of this down on your worksheet. Again, this is something you're taking home with you. This is the most actionable thing that you can come away from this workshop with, is what you've put down on this paper so that you can start to plan this out. Stand up again, go find someone you haven't met yet, someone whose company you don't know yet, learn some things about them, try to learn some things about what your organization is going to do. So we're just going to do this one more time, and then we're going to wrap up the exercise. Good? And here we go. What I want you to do right now, because volunteering is really hard, I want everybody to point to one person at your table who's the designated person. If I pick a table randomly, I'd love for you to sort of talk about anything you learned, any new insights, anything you didn't learn but you think other people are doing terribly. Anything like that. So everybody, designate a person. I'll walk around randomly and just choose a table. So the hardest part of all day.
I think about the processes and how we have a lot of commonalities, at least with the 2 persons that I talked to. And then how, even though we're doing so different things in our industries, then the processes that we're using can be like super alike, at least in the way that we act, and then in the way that things are structured. And then from what I see, at least also from the consultancy point, then how those things can be improved in order for us to get better. Because in the end, it's just like processes that you need to create. So I feel that the pains are the same, the good things are the same, and then it's just like how can we can start changing those things in order to like be better. So
I'd say that probably hits on a pattern that we see quite a lot, which is the number one place to start, the easiest thing to do is just to restructure. We're going to change job descriptions, we're going to create a new COE, and then we leave off quite a lot of what is in that model. That's why we use a model like that that hits on every aspect of what you need to succeed at this, right? If you're not rewarding people in the right way, if you don't have the right technologies in place, you can change the structure, but you're still not going to win there. So one of the other things that I heard is it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. The common theme that I've heard talking to several people is talent. Talent is really difficult, and we're all in this. So full disclosure, we struggle with this too. Everyone's trying to hire really good data scientists or thinking about how to upskill our own. And probably everyone in this room has some version of that experience. So what I'd love is for someone to share success in how you've made it through that talent challenge. You know, is it hiring? Do you have a good internal training process? Do you have anything that you can share with the rest of this room to help them as we're all struggling with this exact same problem?
To help resolve our talent problems, we've done two things. One is focus on culture, right? I think 2 or 3 years ago, when you came to our company, people didn't really know each other. And so we've really put a focus on getting together as a team, going out in the city together, doing things on the weekends, as well as to generate a pipeline. Then we've also focused on creating local partnerships with universities to generate that way. Recruiting senior leaders is at the right price point in the Bay Area is still a struggle for us, though.
My guess is that probably resonates with everybody in the room. Any last questions, thoughts around this exercise that you want to share, ask? You have a whole room of experts here, some of whom have been good at it, some of whom are struggling with it. Anyone have questions or thoughts that you want to share before we go on to one last piece? No? Okay, cool. The last thing I want to think about. So this is an example of how this sort of works in practice. And no organization comes to us and says, I don't have any problems, we just need a COE. That's all we need, right? It always starts with some underlying issue that someone's struggling with. So here's a great example. This is a market where we're working hand in hand with Domino, with a lot of clients, and they came to us because there was probably a familiar problem, a whole lot of legacy code and legacy models that are running in SaaS that are still running, and no one knows who wrote them, and they left, and no one can dismantle them, and I'm not even sure why it's in production anymore, and I don't know what to do about this. So this is a very common problem we see a lot. Someone wants to move more into an open source data environment, share data a lot better, understand the business rules and what's running in the background, and democratize that data so that everyone can pitch in and improve the situation. This is one of those things where an organizational change can make a big difference. So very briefly, because I'm kind of out of time, I'm guessing that almost everyone has a familiarity here, right? We've got disparate data sources. Someone gets asked to kludge those together and then spit out a CSV. And the CSV ends in V1 JFM 2019. And then the CSV goes to train a model. I'm not sure where the code is. It's on my laptop, and my laptop's at home today. But I've got the CSV file with scores and stuff, and here, let's put this into production. Right? So that's a very common problem that we see a lot. Just a disorganization. Quite a lot of data scientists come out of some sort of academic training where this makes perfect sense, right? Including myself. And we have to relearn how to do that in a modern, fast-moving organization. And what we end up doing is transferring that into some transformative cloud technology. So in this case, we were using pretty simple centralized locations in AWS. We modularized the code. We brought it all together. We prioritized a lot of models that we can now port into an open source language, upskill a lot of the people in that organization. And they had a statistics group that was traditionally doing some of this, not totally handling it very well. And we helped them transform that into a COE focused on more machine learning than statistics, because that's where they really wanted to move, and that's where the size of their data was going. And now we've got a production system running in their newer cloud environment. We've got a COE who is serving multiple parts of the organization. And the reason I want to highlight this is a very successful story. This is one of the largest financial institutions in the world. They're handling your money probably right now, and they're doing it a lot better. And it starts from a common problem that we probably all have, which is just not doing data science very efficiently, waiting 6 months to get a result and not really sure how to trace the lineage of that result. And now we've got something that runs a lot more efficiently. The technology here has enabled the COE to share data, to manage that knowledge, to run their models in production, and be able to serve business units more efficiently than they were before, right? So a common problem can lead to a restructuring of the organization. If you have all those pieces in place, that can now run like a fine-tuned machine. And I think that's it. So you have most of our contact information. Please reach out at any point. If you got questions about this, so quite a lot of our work doesn't involve money changing hands or contracts being signed. We love talking about this. We love having conversations. And it's very likely that maybe we can get on the right track if there's a problem just with a conversation and not with a contract. That's what I absolutely love to do, and that's why I come to these things. So please reach out if you have questions, or if there's something bigger. Yeah, money and contracts are fun too. All right, so thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I think we're only 2 minutes over. Not bad.